Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to today's webinar that's kindly brought to us by Global Business Services. We have Grant Wilkinson who's going to be taking us through this new phase that we're in. Interesting times. It was coming, and then suddenly it was there and it sort of sneaked up on us. So it's quite we've got quite a lot to share with you today. There's a lot of information to absorb. Please do keep it as interactive as possible. I will be watching the Q&A and the chat box, so any queries or something you feel that we're missing, please do let us know. We've been quite busy from an industry body perspective, BPESA, and we've lent a lot on Global Business Services for a lot of their legal expertise during this period of time. Some of you would have been on previous webinars with Johnny Goldberg with regards to labor law specifically. And I know that we're heading into that phase now where a lot of it's becoming a reality. So things that we were sort of grappling with previously have now become a reality. But we've been really grateful for our industry, the Global Business Services sector's input and support during this time. You guys are basically facing the reality. You're on the ground with your staff, you're keeping operations up and running. And yeah, unprecedented as we know, but this is now our new normal, which we're all playing with. And then just to add to this, of course, we have the POPIA Act that's come in. So what I'm going to do, just to kind of get a bit of a gauge on where everybody's at the moment with the Act having sort of sneaked up on us, I'm just going to run a quick poll. If you can all just take a moment just to respond, just so that we have a bit of an idea on where everybody's understanding is with regards to POPI. And that'll really sort of help us understand a little bit better what's happening in your world and how deep we need to sort of dive into the discussion now. The win is that Global Business Services are available to chat to in more detail if you want to actually sit down with them and interrogate what it is that you are doing or aren't doing and should be doing, etc. So we will be sharing Grant's details at the end of the session. But I'm just going to let the poll run for another moment and just see where everybody's at and then share that. And I think in the meantime, while you're responding to the poll, Grant, welcome. If I can hand over to you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that. I really appreciate the introduction. And again, always good to work with industry as well and supporting industry in the efforts to sort of upskill and keep up to date with relevant legislation. Yeah, it's a great being here. Yeah, I think I'm going to try and keep it as informative as possible and as informal as one can within the parameters of this, but it is content heavy, but we'll try and put some polls in between, some good videos in between to keep it interactive as well. And like you said, Tracy, if there's any questions that the guys have, they must feel free to do so. And if something does pop up that I don't catch up, if you could just let me know there's a question that comes up and we can then address that as it goes, 100%. But I see the poll results are in, looks like it.
It is, yes. And it seems that everyone's sitting pretty much in the middle saying, we have an idea, but we're not 100% sure. So please help.
Yeah, well, okay, we'll do, no problem. All right, thanks very much for that. Let me share my screen and then let's take it from there. All right, but guys, yeah, thanks very much for this. And I couldn't help, Tracy, but see the great advertising that was done on social media. And I said, oh, I'm going to use that as my landing page, my startup slide as well for the presentation purposes. Very beautifully done, very creative. Who I am and who the team is, as Tracy indicated, I'm Grant Wilkinson. I'm an attorney by trade. I specialize in labor law and come with a little bit of a commercial background as well. I think for industry purposes, you see the picture at the bottom. Don't worry, it's the team from Cape Town. I used to live in Cape Town permanently. Now I flip between Joburg and Cape Town. Predominantly at the moment for COVID-19, I am basing myself in Johannesburg, but we were fortunate enough to win the training provider of the year for BPESA and the consultancy of the year in 2015 as well. And that's just the image of the team. And again, thanks very much for the continued support and long may the relationship continue with Global Business Solutions and BPESA. the goal was done. I think it's good to know where people stand, etc., and their knowledge in the Act. Now, as Tracy indicated, there's been a lot of talk about this Act for quite a long time. In fact, those of you who follow Mushfiq, he had put a YouTube on his YouTube channel. He interviewed me about POPI, and I'd indicated that the discussion had been going for quite some time. And he even said that when he was a call center manager, he had in fact been spoken to about POPI and it's coming, etc. So it has been coming for some time, and there were threats earlier this year. A few consultancies put out that it's 1 March, 1 April, etc. And as I indicated in that interview, quite fortunately, I know the guys quite well in the space, in the regulator space, and they told me that, listen, Grant, second half of the year, this is coming. And when I spoke to them shortly, a couple of weeks before this became effective, they told me, look, Grant, COVID-19 might delay things. And surprisingly, despite them indicating it might be delayed, now we have the Act as of 1 July. It's been in effect. Now, obviously, information and the protection thereof is critical. And we sort of trying to, in my view, my personal view, follow the European sort of standards. So a lot of you guys working in the space would work with European clients, guys from England, etc. And their data obviously receives the protection of what's called the GDPR. So if you have those processes in play, it could very well be that you have the protocols already, minor adjustments here and there in terms of POPI, and then you'll be on top of things again. If you haven't had that, POPI no doubt will have a significant impact on the systems you must put in play. So similar to GDPR, where there was I think it was a 2-year easing period, we have a 1-year easing period where the Act is effective as we speak. However, there is a year in which they will enforce by means of educating rather than enforcing by punishment. So if you do something wrong, they'll have a conversation with you, address it with you and stuff, and find mechanisms in which to amend processes and protocols to be in line with legislation. But come 1 July 2021, unfortunately, that goes by the wayside and is straight into the punitive space of potential imprisonment, fines, etc. As an example of where things can go wrong with personal information is the Liberty breach. Now, Liberty obviously had a hack, and millions of clients' information was exposed out there. And the interesting thing is that Liberty didn't know about the fact that they were hacked until such time as the hackers actually contacted Liberty and told them, "Oi, by the way, we've hacked you." And even then, we're talking about June 2018, the information regulator was in place. The Act might not have been effective, but the information regulator then wanted a meeting with Liberty and said, look, how is this possible? Talk to us through this data breach, etc. So your information regulator is going to be very keen and very much on top of things to make certain that people's information has necessary protections, etc. And particularly in the space you're working in, you work with clients' information on a daily basis, right? And if you work in the financial services, sometimes even bank details, etc. So I just thought I found a nice video in preparation for this, and I thought I'd just share it. It is from an industry itself, or governmental authority, and I think it's good from your perspective. It has bearing, even though it's GDPR, it has bearing in your space as well. Yeah, so let's have a listen.
Welcome to the call center. When collecting information over the phone, there are guidelines in place which not only ensure organizations comply with the law, but also help to put customers at ease to give their information. Mary Jones is calling from home and is ordering a mobile broadband service.
Good morning, Ian speaking. How can I help?
Oh, hi. I was thinking about getting mobile broadband. Is that the one with the little stick that you plug into your laptop?
Yeah, that's right. It's a USB modem. You can use it in your laptop, take it anywhere with you, like work. Or
having agreed the deal, Ian at the call centre is taking information from Mary to complete the sale.
Can I just take your name, your email address, your mobile number and your home number, please?
What do you need all that for?
Look, it's just normal business purposes. Do you want this contract or don't you?
Let's pause this right here. Just saying business purposes won't do.
Okay, we can get the USB sent out to you today and it will probably be with you tomorrow. Does that sound okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Along with the USB, you'll receive your starter pack. This will include a copy of your contract and full details of our terms and conditions, including our privacy policy. You can also check our terms and privacy policy on our website at any time.
Explain exactly what you're offering.
So like I said, the pack has all the information in there. We look after your details carefully and we'll only use them to manage your account. We'd also like to keep you up to date on our own products and services. Are you happy for us to contact you about our products and services?
Yeah, I guess so.
Say clearly what the information is for.
Okay, can we contact you by email?
Yeah, that's fine.
And by post?
No problem.
Give the customer clear choices.
We may pass on some of your information to other companies whose products we think you might be interested in, unless you tell us you prefer not to hear from them. Are you happy to be contacted by phone and email by other selected companies?
I don't mind getting a few emails, but I don't really want other people phoning there.
Offer the customer opportunities to opt out of marketing now and in the future.
Okay, that's no problem. I'll just make a note of that. And if you change your mind at any time about the marketing you've seen from us or from other companies we select, just call or write to let us know. The contact details are in your starter pack and on our website, along with the full privacy policy.
See? Everyone's happy. So, to sum up,
Explain exactly what you're offering. Only collect the information you need. Give the customer clear choices. Say clearly what the information is for. Offer the customer opportunities to opt out of marketing now and in the future.
All right. So, yeah, I think it's important, whilst it might be in a different legislative context, the same principles apply. You only collect information that's necessary for the transaction. You only hold it for as long as it's necessary, and you don't use it, and as an example, we'll see later, use it for another potential product that you're selling, etc. So if you look at the legislation and its development, the right to privacy was enshrined in the Constitution of South Africa in 1995 in the final draft of the Constitution. This thing sort of morphed through by 9 March 2001 when it comes to the Protection of Access to Information Act, or POPIA, as some would call it. That in itself was a process where to access certain information about individuals where it's held by individual, there's a protocol to get that. As law firms, I know, I remember I was, what is it, 2002? Yeah, I was in my articles, was 18 years ago now. And I was in my articles and this happened to come across my table, and as the junior in the firm, I was asked to draft the Promotion of Access to Information Act manuals. And those of you who have seen those manuals or have worked on those manuals before would know it's rather intrusive, and took paperwork to a whole new level. So much so that when I handed the piece of work, which is a significant piece of work, to my superior, he told me to get off. Let me be polite and say get off. There was a stronger word in front of it. They say our clients will never ever fill in this information. And obviously the laws progressed subsequent to that, because information that was required was about where you're getting the money from, etc. And the view of the firm at that stage was, listen, Grant, but our clients won't tell us where to get their money from. But as our laws have progressed, you know that to prevent money laundering, etc., those type of issues become quite pertinent. And then obviously the Promotion of Personal Information Act was reiterated again in the Electronic Communications Act, and the big act subsequent, or prior to the POPIA Act, as I call it, is the Consumer's Right to Privacy, captured in the Consumer Protection Act. And the CPA, abbreviation for Consumer Protection Act, put in a lot of these protocols already, and in my view has laid a significant foundation for POPIA. And it's quite interesting that literally it's taken, since POPIA came into effect, I mean, since CPA came into effect, it's taken nearly a decade to actually get the Protection of Personal Information Act in place. There were rumblings as to why that's in play, and there's rumors you'll hear. I'm not going to comment on the rumors, but there's lots of reasons why this was delayed. So if we had to look at the Act itself and the purpose of the Act, the first portion of the Act is to safeguard personal information, to protect information that comes into your hands. It also looks at how do I process that information? So what am I using that information for? So obviously when you sign up, as an example for this particular webinar, you would have given your details through to Tracy's team. And with that information, there would be certain details we'd have. I know with global, what we usually ask for is name, company, etc., details for invoicing purposes, etc. Right? We then provide people with their rights and remedies to protect your personal information. Right? So it also you must put safeguards in place. You can't have people's information just lying around all over the show. Okay. And then obviously the Act also looks at putting a voluntary and compulsory measures to make provision and ensure respect for the privacy of individuals. The Act applies basically to any information that's entered into a record, right? Or for a responsible party by making use of automated or non-automated means. Yeah, so you can actually have the information processed through automation, which most of you guys would have in place, or non-automated means. Important though, you must have the responsible party, that is your organization, either domiciled in the Republic, so you actually have to be based in the Republic, or if you're not domiciled in the Republic, you obviously must make use of means in the Republic itself. Okay. Once those two measures are in place, POPI applies to you. Like I said earlier, though, if you are applying GDPR already, that's POPI on steroids for a little bit of a colloquialism. So you should be okay. The Act does not apply to process information in the course of normal household activity, right? Also, the Act doesn't apply, and this is important, we'll get through this quite, it'll pop up once in a while, is a de-identification of a document to the extent that it cannot be re-identified again. So any particular information that's de-identified and you can't sort of reverse engineer it, the Act won't be applicable to that piece of text or that piece of information, etc. It's either on behalf of a public body involved in national security. They also don't have a POPI applicable to them, right? Obviously, because if it's a national security matter, they need to come in quite quickly and they're excluded from this. Or if the purpose of the interaction is the prevention, detection, obviously assistance in identifying proceeds of unlawful activities. As we'll see the Hawks coming in, not the Hawks, sorry, the SIU coming in now when it comes to some of these activities and some of these tenders recently. Then POPI does not apply. Okay. Cabinet and obviously certain judicial functions, they will be excluded as well. Some questions, if I'd quickly just do a highlight of what potentially could be an impact on your sector. Operationally, obviously, you're going to have to review your strategies. The Act's going to change how, obviously, industry members store, use, and share information. Again, the rider there is if you are all aligned to the GDPR already, minor adjustments, don't get too stressed about this. You're obliged to log, store, and transfer all information securely as well. So your internet security, your IT support, etc., is going to be critical. And again, IT support, internet security, system security, etc., was emphasized even in the King 4 report. And I think it's critical that organizations have that all in order, both from a physical and obviously a cloud-based security. Third parties importantly involved in data access, like your IT support, will need to enter into agreements with you and implement the obviously security measures in place. So you have to be satisfied with whoever you're contracting with, that they are properly contracting and utilizing that information, particularly if you're sharing information with third parties. What's important though, from your perspective, is you can only use a person's information for the purpose that it was collected for, right? So if you're getting the information for a particular campaign, and then you get another campaign, you can't use Grant's information from this particular campaign, which he signed up for another campaign, unless Grant actually had agreed to that. And as you saw in that particular video clip earlier, is asking the individual, are they comfortable being contacted by third parties? Can we share their information, etc.? And those of you would know that in certain products, when you sign up for certain products, often there's a box that you tick off where you say you're open to receiving communication about deals from other affiliate businesses, etc. That's the type of conversation that one has in that regard. So that's sort of drilling down a bit into your space, but it goes far deeper than this, right? One of the most profound scandals with regards to information when I say recent times, I suppose time flies when you're having fun, and this is 4 years ago. The Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal is a big one, okay? This is sort of visually how it's broken down, and in essence, 87 million Facebook users, those of you who like Facebook and you share way too much information on Facebook, your data was exposed through various mechanisms to Cambridge Analytica. Right? Cambridge Analytica was a political consulting firm, and they worked on the Trump campaign, right? Obviously targeting the way in which messages are sent through to you, etc. And it's interesting to see how things progress. Don't think Trump's necessarily the only bad guy, if you will, or person using information. The Obama campaign had also used that information, except the Obama campaign was honest about it. They told people this is what they're doing, whereas the Trump campaign had been very hush-hush about how they conducted themselves in that regard. There's some interesting technology that exists nowadays, just as an aside. It's not in the slideshow. I took it out because I felt that it would be irrelevant for your purposes, but just for those of you who want a little bit of a chappy moment, there's the technology nowadays that literally has facial recognition. And it's important that we understand how technology is developing and how important it is that we keep the data that we have in our possession and make certain we properly dispose of same, if we are getting rid of it or properly processing it. So here's a video just briefly on the Cambridge Analytica scandal, just to explain the sort of broader impact that personal information might have and the breaches in terms of personal information might have.
By now, you've probably heard that Facebook is scrambling to contain the fallout over a data privacy scandal. Mark Zuckerberg finally addressed the story on Wednesday, but only after a delete Facebook campaign had started to gain momentum around the world.
So this was a major breach of trust, and I'm really sorry that this happened. We have a basic responsibility to protect people's data, and if we can't do that, then we don't deserve to have the opportunity to serve people.
So how do we get here, and how does Facebook recover? Well, first of all, let's figure out what happened. So on March 16th, the New York Times and The Guardian reported that a data mining firm named Cambridge Analytica, which had worked on Donald Trump's presidential campaign, had improperly obtained access to more than 50 million user profiles. Experts believe the firm could have used that data to gain an unfair advantage in targeting voters. Mark Zuckerberg didn't say anything about these stories for 5 days, and then on Wednesday, he wrote a Facebook post and gave an interview to CNN.
I'm going to challenge you.
Well, we're here now.
I'm going to challenge you.
And we're going to make sure that we do a good job at it.
Have you done a good enough job yet?
Well, I think we will see.
This scandal is extremely weird because we've known the basic details that Cambridge Analytica got access to these profiles for more than 2 years. It's not clear that the data they obtained was really all that useful to them, and the number of profiles that they supposedly obtained, 50 million, that might turn out to just be marketing hype from Cambridge Analytica. Despite all that, this is the biggest public relations crisis Facebook has faced since the aftermath of the 2016 election. Senators are calling on Zuckerberg to testify, the Federal Trade Commission is investigating, British authorities are investigating, and Facebook's stock price has been declining. So let's look what happened. The story starts in 2014. That's when a University of Cambridge researcher named Alexander Kogan created an app called This Is Your Digital Life. About 270,000 people downloaded it, gave away their information, and Kogan, unbeknownst to them, passed along that information to a data mining and political strategy firm named Cambridge Analytica. At the time, Facebook's platform API let developers like Kogan access information about your friends as well as yourself. Christopher Wiley, who used to work at Cambridge Analytica, told The Times and The Guardian that that was how his company was able to get access to information of as many as 50 million people. And the idea was that by gleaning your Facebook likes, the company could begin to understand your personality and then more effectively target political advertising at you. This kind of thing is known as psychographic profiling. Experts say it can be useful at the margins in persuading voters, but at the same time they say its effect can be easily overstated. Granted, Trump's campaign wasn't the first to gain information about potential supporters using Facebook. In fact, in 2012, President Obama's election team had created an app and done a very similar thing. But there was a big difference. President Obama's team told voters what it was doing. Cambridge Analytica obtained this information in total violation of Facebook's rules and didn't tell anybody who was taking Kogan's personality quiz that their data would eventually be used for political advertising targeting. The Guardian revealed the scheme in 2015. Facebook went to Kogan and Cambridge Analytica and demanded that they delete all of the data that they had obtained in violation of Facebook's rules. But the reports say that in reality, Cambridge Analytica and Kogan never deleted the data, and Facebook never investigated to see whether they had deleted the data as promised. This gets to the heart of why some people are deleting their Facebook accounts right now. Facebook made it too easy for developers like Kogan to get access to their data, to their friends' data, and to share it. And it never informed people that their data had been improperly used. The scandal also came at a time when trust in Facebook has never been lower. In the aftermath of the 2016 election, we saw how obviously fake stories could spread faster and more persuasively than many true ones. And we learned that Kremlin-linked groups had waged a highly effective misinformation campaign on the platform, in some cases even illegally buying ads. Meanwhile, new research was coming out showing that just browsing the news feed could make you feel worse about yourself, and a group of former Facebook executives came forward and expressed regret about their part in building the social network to begin with. In short, public perception of Facebook had become a tinderbox. Not that Tinder. But the Cambridge Analytica story was the spark that turned it into a bonfire. After a long delay, Zuckerberg announced plans to address abuses like Cambridge Analytica's. In 2014, Facebook had already stopped developers from gaining access to information about your friends. Now it's going a step further. If you go 3 months without using an app, Facebook is going to cut off developer access to any information about you. And for developers that did have access to all that information, including information about your friends way back in 2014, Facebook is going to demand that they submit to an audit or be kicked off the platform. So will this fix the problem? On one hand, it's a start. Restricting developer access to your data could help Facebook start to rebuild some trust. But the larger issue for Zuckerberg is that he's really confronting 3 crises at once. There's the data privacy issue that the Cambridge Analytica story reveals. There's the newsfeed integrity issue and whether we can trust what we see on Facebook. And there's the broader cultural reckoning over social media, how we spend our time there, and whether it's ultimately good for us and the world. In January, Zuckerberg said that fixing Facebook's platform would be his personal challenge for the year. And yet, as he wades into this latest crisis 5 days after it began, it's not clear Facebook is doing everything it can to address it. And as a delete Facebook campaign starts gaining steam around the world, the challenge of fixing Facebook's platform feels greater than ever. By now you've...
And obviously we know that Facebook continues to have these challenges and will do so, no doubt, for the foreseeable future. So to start off with, to get into the theory behind POPI, some good practical examples, we're going to look at a few definitions. So when we talk through the text now, you'll have an idea what we're discussing, what we're talking about. But at any stage, if there are questions, please feel free and to ask and shoot with questions if you have any. Okay. I see there are 8 chats, so perhaps it's just, if possible, check the...
Thanks, Ronja. The chats they're all good.
All good. Okay, perfect. 100%. Cool. So briefly, the data subject as a whole, if you look at the definition of data subject, is the person to whom personal information relates to. All right. So if you're referring to data subject, it's the actual information you have. Whose information is it? That's what's referred to as data subject. De-identification. This is the process by which obviously you delete information that identifies the data subject, or information that can be used or manipulated to identify the subject, or you use some level of methodology to sort of figure out who the individual is. And I think it's important just we realize that often we take notes on our desks, etc. Please make certain those notes are destroyed appropriately. Don't leave those notes lying around with the person's ID numbers, etc. I saw some time ago, I think it was still the Crime and Investigation channel, but many moons ago, I was quite interested to see paper was put into a straight line shredder. And what the guys had actually done is they actually had taken that shredded paper and actually put it back together again to get the full correspondence. So it's possible to do that. And hence, if you are going to have a shredder in the office, it's always recommended to have a diamond cutter, or alternatively, have proper companies come in and go through a deletion process with you. And we're moving towards, in South Africa, a process similar to what's in the US, where people have certification and provide you with a certification that the information was properly destroyed, whether it be paper-based or whether it be electronic. I know there is one organization, I won't punt it online, but there is one organization that I'm aware of that had that US certification in South Africa, but I'm certain as things go by, others would as well. And that's what you're going to have to push for going forward. Direct marketing, obviously, this is to approach a data subject either in person or by mail or electronic communication, obviously promoting or offering to supply any goods or services. This is sometimes where you guys in your space come in, right? Or requesting them to make a donation of any kind. I don't know if you do that. I still have my name on the list somehow for, I'm originally from the coast, in the Eastern Cape, but somehow a particular sea rescue space has my name on a donator list. And I had to advise them that, listen, I'm in Joburg, so no, not going to happen right now. But they've held my details, and every 3 years or so, somehow, even though I've asked them, look, you know, I support other charities, Lacquer, thanks very much for your time. I'm decent, okay, I'm not going to give the guys too much beans, but I say, look, but please, you know, take me off your list. Every 2 or 3 years, I get a phone call, and I hear about their situation. So be careful that when people ask you to remove them from the list, you do remove them from the list, please. All right, they don't keep contacting guys if you are in this type of space. Junk mail, obviously, this is unsolicited mail where you usually send out by direct marketing and you just spam firms, etc. New products, new books, new etc. And I think everyone has become a lot more aware. Even reputable organizations are very aware of not over mailing clients, even if clients had signed up to the database. They're very clear in terms of, look, let's not mail the guy so many times this time around, because you don't want to end up in the spam folder. And I think that's really what we're looking at, is really as a society moving away from spamming each other. Electronic communication, interesting enough, it includes text, voice, sound, or image messaging sent out via over electronic communications network, which is stored in the network or obviously in your terminal until it's collected by the recipient. Okay, so electronic communication covers a widespread of information. I must be honest with you, a particular app that's become utilized a lot more by individuals is WhatsApp. As you saw, I'm reaching for it, but there's so much information on this thing over here, on a cell phone. Everything's on there, but WhatsApp clients, usually, because I'm an attorney, clients usually do the phone call or email thing. But I must be honest with you, the last 2 years, people have tended to WhatsApp me more than usual. So I'm carrying a lot of personal information on the phone. The question is, Grant, what security do you have of your client's information on that? Especially when your emails come through there, your messages, your SMSs, your contacts, all that's there, right? What happens if I'm on my phone, in our space now, if I'm on my phone, someone goes past me, steals the phone, runs away with the phone, and it's unlocked, right? Anything can be done with those details, right? We have to be very careful that in those instances, we have systems through our IT infrastructure that, for instance, if devices get stolen, even if they get stolen at your office space, is your IT in a position where they can remotely delete information and sort of just wipe the device clean? Okay, so those are all things you need to look at. Otherwise, that information is out there and people's personal information can be utilized for heaven knows what. Personal information, as I said, this information is identifiable, relating to a natural person or potentially to a juristic person. You'll see the list of information that's available or related to race, gender, pregnancy, the usual stuff from the Employment Equity Act. Medical, financial information, criminal, employment history of the individual, and particularly, you know, where guys are involved in the recruitment space, they're often carrying around CVs. Now, I got the question from a recruiter, I think 2 weeks ago, when they said to me, you know, Grant, we keep CVs afterwards for long periods of time, just after the recruitment for the client is done, because we want to keep those good CVs so that we can call them for other jobs. Is that a problem? Well, potentially, if the person raises a complaint as to why you kept the information, that is potentially an issue. That's what I said. Similarly, if you're busy on a campaign and the client is providing the information for that campaign only, please don't utilize it on other campaigns just because you think, oh, it might be a good person's details to keep. Okay, unless obviously the person's consented. Biometric information, personal opinions, correspondence. The list is not exhaustive either, but just a nice sort of list for you to work with, indicate what personal information is. But again, it's not exhaustive. The other information could form part of this as well. Now, important is you have to have got that personal information directly from the data subject, right? So that information must have been provided to you by Grant, if I'm your client, right? Unless that information is contained from a public record or the liberty has been made public. So you're fortunate, please don't Google me now and put my name on call lists, etc. Love you guys, but not that much. But you know, my cell phone number, my email address is pretty much available on our website, and it's public domain. So I can't complain really if people do collect my detail and do utilize my detail, because you know, I need my detail out there. People require my services. That's why they should contact me. Now, also, if you've signed up, like I said, to a particular product, and in that product, the client has said, look, I consent to you supply my information to an affiliate business of yours to market products to me. That's also doable, right? That's you don't need to correct it directly from the source then. Again, also, and this is where it's becoming a little bit gray, is that collection of the information from another source if it won't prejudice a legitimate interest of the data subject. Now, this is the gray one for me, because inevitably, what defines what won't prejudice my interest? Obviously, the legal argument is going to be, well, you know what, am I legally in any way prejudiced? Am I financially prejudiced, etc.? But the thing is, there could be arguments in other spheres, disturbances, etc. So we have to just be cautious that we just don't utilize C to say, well, you know what, we're contacting you, not prejudiced by this call. You can tell us to fob off. I did say fob, by the way. Important is please don't use that as sort of a catch-all. Make certain you try and stick as close as possible through to A and B above. So when it comes to processing information, people often say, what is processing, Grant? Well, important is it includes the A, B, and C in this diagram. It includes the collection of data, recording of data. It includes the modification of that or alteration. It includes dissemination. How do you distribute that information? Because often we have clients' information and we put it somewhere, right? Or you make available in other formats, right? This is where your CRM system is going to have to be critical. Who's got access to certain information, etc. Do you have levels of authority where certain levels of information are able to be received by everybody, and then there's some levels of authority where only certain information can be received by other levels only, right? And then obviously degrading information, erasing information, or destruction of information as well comes into this in terms of what is processing. So it's the full sort of circle of life of any information entering your system, from collection to transmission through to destruction. Because just how you destroy documentation or how you get rid of information at the end of the day is also covered by POPI. Please bear that in mind. Record obviously includes any of the following. There's a long list for yourself. And again, for our time purposes, I'm not going to go through every single slide. I thought it would be a nice little extra as well. I've inserted a sort of checklist after every single sort of pillar, if you will, of the Act. Please utilize that. I'm not going to go through that with you, but I thought it's just fair to include it in the slideshow so that you can look through it and ask yourself a little self-assessment dipstick analysis to see where you are at and if you're going to be in trouble or not. But again, at some stage, when you might want to, once you're ready to do a self-assessment, you might want to do an assessment, obviously, with organizations. We also do assessments, as Tracy has indicated, and we can happily provide that service to assess where you're at in terms of your compliance, etc. So we talk about books, maps, photographs, documents in writing, right? It must be in possession of control of a responsible party, as I indicated, that it's you as an organization. It doesn't matter whether the information is created by you or not, it's still seen as a record. And it doesn't matter when it came into existence, right? So the document might have come into existence some time ago. Prior to POPI, you've had this information. You can't argue that, look, this information came into our possession prior to POPI. It doesn't matter. You have to go back and fix whatever the processes are that need to be fixed to ensure compliance with POPI. Okay. Doesn't matter when the document came into existence, the Act is applicable, and that is a record. The responsible party, like I indicated, it's a public or private person, you, which either by yourself or in conjunction with other people determine the purpose and means of processing personal information. So you have personal information in your possession, and you either are collecting it, storing it, transmitting it, or eventually destroying it. You are a responsible party, which means that the buck stops with you when it comes to POPI, when it comes to non-compliance with the Act. If there's going to be a fine, if there's someone that's going to go to jail, I hate to break it to you, it is you, ladies and gentlemen. So please make certain whether you are jail material or not. So the important thing to do that little dipstick analysis that I spoke to you about, if I had to sort of focus in on this now, is to say there's 8 real conditions of lawful processing. Now, these 8 are accountability, processing limitation, purpose specification, further processing limitation, right? So you've got the information, you've processed it, now you want to process it further. What dictates and what stipulations are in place with regards to that? The quality of your information, is it up to date, etc., or do you still have Grant on the Sea Rescue donation list? Openness, transparency around this, what security safeguards, and that's, it's interesting that that's the 7th condition, and yet probably one of the most important conditions applicable to lawful processing, and then obviously data participation as well. So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through those 8 for you and just touch on the principles of SAME, all right? And then at the end of each sort of theoretical portion, there's sort of an analysis that gets done, and I'll ask a few questions for you to consider. I won't be going through those questions for our time purposes, but I thought it's a nice little gift to you guys so you can go through it and say, well, where do we stand in respect to Rob? So let's start with the first one, accountability. Now, accountability, the responsible party must ensure that the conditions set out in Chapter 3 and all the measures that give effect to those conditions are complied with at the time of determination of the purpose and means of processing and during the processing itself. In other words, the buck stops with you. The moment you have the information in your possession, the moment you decide, okay, fine, I've received Grant's details, I'm going to be contacting him, so we'll be in touch with you for service, whatever it might be. That's in my possession, right? I've got Grant's details. The moment that comes into play, I'm accountable. I need to be accountable for how I keep the information, how I store it, the security around it, how I process it, who I give Grant's information to, etc. The full circle of life that you saw earlier. So obviously with that comes the necessity to have an information officer appointed, right? Now, some organizations already, because they have roots in Europe, they have a chief information officer, a CIO, right? But there's no reference to a CIO. It just refers to information officer and refers to the possibility of appointing deputies as well, right? Now, that information officer really is the person or individual, and some companies won't necessarily create a new role for this. They'll just give a particular level of, I assume, manager because of the responsibility associated with this extra task to take care of and create a team to deal with POPI, etc. What they're looking at is encouragement with compliance of the body, making certain that there's lawful processing taking place. If there's any requests, so for instance, if I know you have my information, I can contact you and ask you, what information do you have of me? Please provide me with the details, etc. And sometimes even look, I'd like to amend the copy information, etc. Making certain that processes do exist, and we'll see those coming through a little later. Obviously, like Liberty, if there's an investigation that's being done, need to work closely with the regulator then, with the investigation and reporting back to the regulator, right? And general compliance issues, right? Important is you have to make certain that you're registered, and what's nice is it's not just a one-man show or one-lady show. Section 56 provides for the appointment of deputy information officers, so you can create a team around you dealing with the processing of information. So this is the sort of checklist. This is the shortest one of them all, but this is a checklist or dipstick analysis I'd like you to go through in your own time, and it'll give you a sort of fair shake in terms of a fair idea in terms of how compliant you are, potential gaps in your system, etc. Condition 2 is processing limitations. Obviously, you can only be processing information if I, as a data subject, consent to the process, your processing thereof. Secondly, right, if I don't consent, it must be necessary to carry out the actions for the conclusion of the contract. So similar to what you saw earlier when that lady phoned in for a particular contract product that she has, you need the information to conclude the contract. That's when I can process the information, right? If it complies with any principle of law, and what's important is the processing could protect the legitimate interests of that data subject. So for instance, let's say the data subject is not contactable, but to protect their interests for whatever reason, be it financial breach, whatever, you process that information. Okay. So for instance, I had a few, this just sprung to mind now actually as an example. Number D, on the weekend, I went shopping a bit for groceries, etc. And what happened was I'm trying to keep the rest of my family, because I'm out, even at the moment, I'm out in a boardroom of a client. I told them that, look, I've got the session. So they gave me the executive boardroom to utilize and keep everyone away and outside, etc. Because I'm out so often, I said, look, I'm going to rather be the guy to go out more for my family and the protections we have. My son went to school. But other than that, my wife will go to work, etc. But me, I'm the guy who really goes out. So I went shopping, and what happened was good idea. Sorry, my wife is in the financial services space, and she always comes with a good idea of saying, look, put limits on, so if your card's stolen, etc., they can't spend too much of your money. That's awesome, except when you actually are going to a few shops in a row and you're not splitting the burden, and suddenly you end up saying, it says, sorry, you've reached your limit, but it doesn't say that at all, obviously, so it's pretty damn embarrassing. So anyway, so you end up drawing cash, you end up trying to increase your limit, etc. So what the guys do then, I'm with First National, and First National obviously has that fraud tracking process where if they see a few peculiar transactions on your account, they then contact you via a automatically voice generated SMS saying, here's the following transactions. If this isn't you, please do the following. If this is you, just push 1. I think it was something like that. So that's great in the sense that I've perhaps not given them the consent for that, but that's a great service and it's protecting my legitimate interests. I'm certain if I've read my paperwork properly, I've signed off for that service, but yeah, attorneys sometimes say, do what we say, not what we do. A clear example of that, I am. Right. Again, public law duties and obviously pursuing the legitimate interests of the particular third party. That's really where your processing can take place. So I've sort of summarized it in layman's terms, in terms of what it can be done. Right. If it doesn't infringe on the person's privacy, you can utilize it. Obviously, if you only use the minimum amount of information required to process a transaction, that's great. But please bear in mind, don't, as you saw in that video earlier, don't request more information than is necessary for you to conclude that transaction. Okay. Obviously, if you obtain the person's consent, that's great. And obviously collect the information directly unless there's certain exceptions. Okay. I've given you a checklist as well. Please work through that. It gives you a nice little heads up in terms of where you're standing at, how are you processing information, are you compliant with the law. Obviously, a proper full-on assessment goes a lot deeper than this, but this just gives you a sort of quick dipstick. Are we in deep trouble, or are we fairly okay in terms of where we're at? All right, so please utilize those check sheets. All right. Tracy, I'm going to carry on unless you stop me if there are any questions. I will assume there are none, and I'll just keep trudging along.
Thanks, Grant. No, please do. I think you're scaring everybody, possibly, but I think everybody's just really sucking this all up. And I think there's lots of WhatsApps going around right now saying, have we got this in place or not? What's Grant's so we can call him? But I think it's going fantastically. Thank you so much. Great. There's no questions at the moment. But everyone was please actually, just feed into the Q&A or the chat box if there are questions.
Yeah. And at the end, it will be shared as well. The presentation will be shared. So please feel free, as Tracy's saying, be in touch with us. I think it's important that we also assist industry as well and support industry. So please be in touch if you have any queries flowing from the presentation, or perhaps you're a little bit shy to ask in this type of presentation. So if you look at the purpose specification, right, you must take steps to ensure that the data subject is aware of the purpose of the presentation. Again, that's why I found that one earlier, a little bit of a grainy video, I must be honest with you, but I found that that video captures a lot of the theory around POPIA as well, because, sorry, importantly is that they made quite sure, because she asked, why do we need all this information? And remember, he said, well, do you want the transaction or don't you? Do you want the deal or don't you? And then they said, look, pause, this is not appropriate. It isn't appropriate. You must make certain that the person knows why are you collecting that information? What are you going to use it for, etc. Okay. The critical one, and I think this is where people are failing often, is that records of personal information must not be retained any longer than is necessary for achieving the purpose, right? Now, the rider there applies to attorneys as well, and that is that if lengthier retention is required by law. So for instance, in the legal space, we need to keep information for 5 years, and there's a big push currently to move that to 7 years. So by law, then we are allowed to keep it longer. That's great, you know. But in terms of other information, you know, only as long as it's necessary. And I think it's essential that you make certain that you clear with the client, can we add you to the CRM if you're going to add the guys to the CRM as an example. Obviously, if you require the information for lawful purposes, if retention is required in terms of contract, and this is often where, without even consenting to it, this becomes essential. We have a contract between each other for proof purposes, etc. We need that information so we can be in touch with each other, or potentially we can sue each other, worst case scenario. And again, if the data subject consents to the retention of the record for longer time periods, then inevitably that's fine and that is in order. You can also keep personal records for statistical research, etc. But you must put safeguards in place. Important is you de-identify the document then. So if it's purely statistical in nature, right, and you've done what you needed to do, right, unless the client signs off and you keep the information with full details in place, you know what, you have to de-identify if it's for research purposes, right? So I mean, research happens, and stats happen quite frequently, and I think more and more in today's modern times, people are trying to sort of capture reports, if you will, or stats and infographics often. I remember a year or two ago, we had, before we were grounded, if you will, we had a sort of diagram which captured, you know, how many delegates had attended our training, how many flights we'd been on, etc. Now, Johnny set some benchmarks for flights. I can't imagine how he's feeling, because I feel quite itchy by not flying too much. I'm pretty grounded. Luckily, I head to my second home, Cape Town, on Thursday afternoon for my first Corona timed flight, my first flight since March. But usually we sit in between, I suppose, 2 returns, so about 4 to 8 flights a week, I suppose, usually. So 2 return or 4 returns a week. But as I said, you know Johnny Goldberg, and Johnny flies more than us. And everyone asks, how do you guys keep on doing that? I mean, the guy flies more than you, bills more than you, works harder than you. It's hard not to keep going, right? What's important is just, guys, is that with the statistical information, right, no matter if you do these fancy graphics, etc., if it's not necessary to keep the guys' names, you know, sometimes for training purposes, you need the race, etc. That becomes relevant, obviously, right? Keep that in place. And obviously, destruction. If you destroy the document, please make certain you cannot reconstruct the record. Too often I see, and I know when I lived in Cape Town, I lived in Rondebosch in Cape Town, and there, Cape Townians refer to the guys as bergies, where the guys would literally go around and pick out your bin, and some take out recycling, some, I know in Rondebosch, the guys that put the meals on top of some old, you know, meals on top of the bins, etc. But in Joburg, there's a very, very strict system and a very keen system in terms of recycling. And actually, these paper recyclers come through. The guys have these little wheelies with them. And yeah, the guys are actually in your bin or in your recycling bag on the side. I know I live in, I suppose, it's Parkmore. I hate calling it Sandton. People always say, no, call it Sandton, Grant. I'm like, no, I'm not that guy. It's Parkmore. I live in Parkmore now. And overall there, you know, the guys come in, there's a system, your bag's there, the guys load your bag up, it's done. Now, I'm thinking with all the working from home, I'm wondering how much non-compliance there is at the moment. You know, have you scribbled down details? You know, you see me walk around the page. Do I scribble down details? It's my little way, I'm archaic that way. And do I tear it up, or do I actually take that home and chuck it in the diamond cut shredder? So it's important that we properly destroy documentation so that we make certain that purpose doesn't get extended by somebody else or third party. Okay, I've given you a brief layman's term summary, work through with it as well, but in essence, put mechanisms in play, guys, that it's only kept for as long as it's required, and when you do need to destroy it, it's destroyed properly, all right? Your little checklist over here for asking yourself some questions about how you are compliant or non-compliant. Please work through that as well. It's a nice little 10-question questionnaire for that particular condition. Further processing. Now, this is where it becomes a little bit tricky, because I've received information for a particular purpose, right? But now I want to actually use that information for a further purpose, for purpose of the transaction, okay? So further processing must be compatible with, in other words, it must meet the criteria for the following, right? Once you've identified and obtained consent for that specific purpose from the client, or sorry, the data subject, right? That personal information can only occur within that particular ambit. In other words, I can only process the information for the fulfillment of the original purpose that the information was provided to me for. The further processing requires that I can only use the information for those purposes specified and what was consented for. If I'm going to use it for anything else or disclose it to any other recipients, I need the further consent of that particular individual, right? So for instance, if you need to do credit checks or anything like that, make certain that people are aware that you're going to be doing this, right? If you're going to record conversations so you can use it for third party or for training, or my favorite, call centers in Cape Town, hearings in Cape Town. When you start hearing, you start getting the record played back to you about how some operators maybe lose their mind at clients, etc. That's when you know, you must be able to advise client that, look, we kept for quality purposes, etc. Fortunately, a lot of the stuff's built in your industry. So I must be honest with you, I'm not too overwhelmed by the impact of POPI, because I know a lot of you are doing GDPR and are compliant with GDPR. So it gives you a little checklist here now to see whether in fact your further processing is compatible. And what you have to take into account is, what is the relationship between the original instruction in terms of why am I processing information versus the further processing information? Is it sensitive information or not? Because obviously if it's sensitive information, we have to be very cautious how we deal with that, and potentially think twice about further processing the document. What are the consequences? Is the person going to benefit from me sending it on to a third party potentially, or is that potentially going to have a challenge? How did I collect the information? Did I get it from an indirect source? So did someone sell me a database? Heaven forbid, right? Because that's really not compliant with the law. Or did I get the information myself? And again, any contractual rights between the parties, right? Often in contracts, and particularly in commercial contracts, the original purpose is agreed to, but in there is mentioned the fact that there may be necessity to further process the information, and that is agreed to. Okay, so again, this is just a summary that important. It must be publicly available. The person must have consented to you. Alternatively, by law, protecting their interests to prevent serious harm, you could obviously further process the information, similar to what F&B did with me the weekend, or obviously historical purposes. But again, stats can only be used if you've de-identified the document enough so that I can identify that it was Tracy, that this information was on record. Okay, so go through that. It gives you a nice little assessment tool in that one, and again, gives you some tips there. So an example rather that I have for you is, if I sign up for a specific campaign, I think I've mentioned it already, the call center collected the data to use for that campaign only. I can't then contact that client for different campaigns, right? Similarly, if I opted in to receive SMS communication only, you can't suddenly use another channel to contact me if I've signed in to say only contact me with my SMS, right? Again, not only is this supported by POPI, you have other legislation, the Consumer Protection Act, and their National Opt-out Register. also plays a significant role in this regard. So I've given you that dipstick analysis to build onto the other discussions earlier. Again, look at it, use it. If you have any questions afterwards, be in touch, and let's connect. Okay. Now, when it comes to information quality, you must take reasonable practical steps to ensure that the personal information is complete, accurate, not misleading, and obviously updated when necessary. So particularly in your space where you're contacting clients for services, etc., or servicing clients with complaints about their groceries, as an example, or services. You know, and I know in the original stages of lockdown, I received quite a few calls from contact centers in Cape Town, where there was discussion of whether they qualify as an essential service, and they were dealing with municipal accounts, etc. And obviously they would fall under that, right? So you must make certain that the information is reasonably practically captured. The trouble comes in, the Act doesn't really set out what is reasonable and what is practical, right? So again, it's going to depend on the circumstances of your organization, the industry itself, and also the clientele. But as a client, I can contact you and ask you to update my details, right? Because I mean, let's face it, some people's details haven't been updated for the longest time. I remember I went to a particular institute, and they asked me to update my contact details, and I hadn't done it for the longest time. I must be honest with you, I didn't tell them, they didn't call me, and they still had me at my second address in Cape Town when I just moved to Cape Town in 2008. So it's quite interesting that you have to realize that, would they be non-compliant? No. Would it be good for them to contact client and update the register, let's say once a year or so? Sure. For me, I think that going the extra mile in this regard would help. And that's your little assessment tool. What processes do you have in play, as an example, to update personal information? Who is to make certain that the information is accurate and up to date? Because particularly in our space as a training provider, in the human resources is a large portion of our business. And HR people have a lifespan, of 3 years in an organization on average, and people tend to move. But are we making certain that our guys are updating the CRM so that when someone moves, we can track them? It's good not only from their perspective, for the client's perspective, but also for us. We don't lose a client, we gain more clients as the person progresses within their HR space. Obviously, you can only process information, obviously, if you're a responsible party. And again, you must collect that information and take reasonable steps to make certain the following is aware, that the data subject is aware of the following, right? What information is being collected, who's the responsible party, so you, right? The name and address, right? The purpose of the information is being collected. As I said, look at the video earlier, right? Is it voluntary or is it mandatory? So don't try and flesh out more information. You might say, well, this information is voluntary, this is necessary for purposes. Those of you who fill forms in, I know, particularly on certain campaigns, I find these social media things quite nifty sometimes and quite irritating at the same time, where they flag actually by putting asterisks in place what information is necessary and what information is not. I, in fact, ordered something online actually earlier this week. For my sins, I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan. I know the Liverpool fans are having a go now. What, 30 years later, guys? Yeah. Well, at least you have a premiership recently, so I won't badmouth too much and rip too much. With that, I'd actually order online, and certain information was captured. This is what we do need. This is extra information. Do you want to receive messages from our partners, sponsors, etc., or partner affiliate businesses? All that information is there. Nice, easy to fill in. And good systems in place on Spur's front. There's certain exclusions, obviously. You don't have to comply with the data subject notification requirements in certain situations, right? So for instance, when you're notifying people that are collecting information for following purposes, if the non-compliance with the openness is not going to be prejudicial to the individual, if it's required for the state of national security, right? So if you're getting information to prevent money laundering or the state being captured in South African context, then obviously, then it's not necessary to be that open about it. To enforce SARS legislation, if it's not practical, for instance, in the case of emergency, if you're processing information, right? So for instance, I was hospitalized urgently on one occasion many years, 2005, 15 years ago. And I was quite happy how they dealt with me, because this particular hospital took me in straight away, didn't ask me for any real details other than my name, surname, etc. And they actually said, look, medical aid will deal with later because he's going to die if we don't just deal with him now. And the doctor said it was 5 minutes later, that was it, because I actually had flatlined. There's a running joke in my family. I've flatlined 3 times in my life. And the running joke in my family is, well, every time the big guy in our belief system sees you coming, he says, no, I'm not ready for that, Wilkinson, yet. And he closes the gates and throws me back down. I can understand. The last one I might understand, because I was 25 at the time. It was 15 years ago. But the first 2, I was a baby and I was 4. I couldn't have done that much wrong. But be that as it may, then in case of emergency, you know what? They grab my medical card up or wallet perhaps, and they go through the information and make certain they process it accordingly at some stage. But they did the decent thing. They didn't worry. They just said name, surname, any allergies, and then that was it. All right. Again, historical stuff, the statistical stuff, as we discussed earlier as well. So here's again a little nice analysis for you of how you can comply with this and to assess, are you there yet or not quite. Condition 7 is your security safeguards, right? Important with this is that you need to make certain that whatever information you have, that it's not subject to being lost or stolen, right? I suppose that's a stronger word, interfering with it or modifying it, right? People can't get the information and tweak it, which happens sometimes, particularly with the UIF system that we have now. I know it's a controversial statement, but some people had hacked the system and had inserted their detail into the payees portion rather than the actual poor guy suffering at home and needing to get that TERS payment. So clearly, it's quite ironic that the UIF was the first real breach post-POPI from a government institution, I suppose. You need to be responsible. You need to put security mechanisms in play, right? You need to make certain that third parties who process information are processing it properly. What is their process with regards to handling that information? So for instance, if you're using courier companies, what are their protocols with regards to this? Like I said, if you're going to have guys coming in to destroy information, your shredders, shredding companies, etc., what are they dealing with it? Where's the certification, etc.? And again, what are you doing as an organization to notify stakeholders if your information has been compromised in any way or form? Because the sad thing is the following: if there are any security compromises, guess what? You can't keep quiet and try and fix it and hide it, etc. You actually have to notify people. You notify the individuals concerned and you notify the regulator, right? Also, you have to put stuff up visibly on your website as well, okay? And you have to tell people what the breach is about. And if you can't identify who the data subject is whose information has been breached, again, clearly, even more clearly on the website and potentially as far as a regulator would authorize. The regulator, would direct. The regulator would often direct publication in newspapers, but I suppose with modern times moving away from paper-based communication, it would be on other electronic streams as well. Okay. So this is your notification if there's a breach, okay? And this is why it's critical that your client database is kept accurate. You get it to the last known address, right? Sent by email, placed in a prominent position on the website, news media, and anything, as I said, directed by the regulator. Please make certain. This is why the quality of information becomes critical, because if Grant's information is not accurate, then you know what, no matter what you do, you're not going to comply with 7, which means you're going to be in breach of the earlier condition with regards to the actual quality of the information you have as well. And like I said, prison, etc. does follow. More likely to be fined in this context. I think our prison system is kind of overrun at the moment, but you never know. So there's some questions, again, your dipstick analysis that you can ask yourself. Please utilize them accordingly. The last condition, ladies and gentlemen, before we go into a little bit of some touch on some theory, I am aware of the time, there's data participation. Now, I can participate in my data. I can request you to delete my information, capture it, change it, etc. Please just make certain that when someone contacts you for this, so for instance, whether you hold my information, what you hold, and also changing it, etc., that you make certain that the person you're speaking to is that particular person. Another financial institution client was a little bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It rhymes with rugger. It's a stronger word though, but I suppose it's not a swear word, but I won't risk it. So the client was a nasty piece of work, always shouting at people, etc., always pushing things. And then they get a call at this particular institution, and the person's shouting, ranting and raving, similar to the client, etc., and says, listen, yeah, this transaction's happening. And it was a law firm, in fact. It wasn't a financial institution. It involved a financial institution, but it was a law firm. And this law firm then, the young conveyancing secretary, I think it was, changes the client's details and puts the money, which was a couple of million, into this account, changed account, because sure, Mr. Wilkinson, let me be the bad guy for a change, is so rough. Trouble comes in. Mr. Wilkinson contacts him the next day and he's going, look, what's happening with things? No, we've changed things. Don't worry. All sorted from yesterday's conversation. Guess what? Mr. Wilkinson never phoned them, guys. So sadly, these millions of rands had left the law firm and were paid into some third party's account. So make certain that when you correct information, you make certain that you are talking to the right individual. All right. When it comes to processing information under data participation, you can't process information concerning a child who's subject to the parental control in terms of law. Okay. Obviously, when you're dealing with that, you get the guardian's consent, similar to what schools when they process applications, etc. The person's religious or philosophical beliefs, their sex life, criminal behavior, are obviously subject to certain exceptions, right? The exemptions are obviously the race, if it's compliant with law and to prevent unfair discrimination. And obviously, in terms of affirmative action, you'll deal with race, obviously, you process racial information. Trade union membership as well, again, you would get the consent to share information with the trade union, pay their subs, etc. Your subject's health or sex life, obviously the exemption there is medical professions, healthcare, social services, etc. Probation, child protection, all that. There's your list of exemptions. Please work through that. That's how you can actually process the data subject's health or sexual life matters. I'm not too certain if any of those apply to you, so please don't ask your client any particular questions of this ilk. All right. There obviously criminal behavior for applications, etc. So here's your checklist over there. POPI, when did it commence? 1 July. Okay, 1 July 2020. That's when the act commenced. Like I said earlier, please bear in mind that with this, you have a year where they're going to be a little bit lenient with you. They're going to rap you on the knuckles and say, oi, Wilkinson, get your house in order. But come 1 July 2021, they're going to go, Wilkinson, you know, how you look like an orange uniform. Or here's a payment of a fine, etc. So please do take that into account. So the next question, because we're going to just delve into briefly, I see there's no questions, so I can delve a little bit into GDPR, is you know, how many of you actually are operating under the realm of the GDPR? We haven't got an official poll for this, but yeah, if you could indicate, and then Tracy can give me feedback. Abu, you raised your hand. That's clever. Thank you for raising your hand, because I can see that.
Thanks, Grant. And just in the meantime, while we're having some respondents come in there, Poonam actually asked if they are outsourcing from outside of South Africa's borders to South Africa to service the EU and the UK. Would they have to look at the GDPR, or would they have to be POPIA compliant? Which one? Or
both? Both.
There you go.
You'd have to comply with both, because if you look at it, so I just got his question open. I hope there's not a black mark around my screen from Tracy.
There is, yeah.
Oh, there is. Okay, there we go. I'm reading his question, and it's saying, if you're located outside of South Africa, but we are outsourcing our work to South Africa. So remember, as soon as you're processing through South Africa, right, you'd have to ensure POPIA compliance. Remember your domicile, and you're processing EU personal data on behalf of a UK client. Well, actually, in this instance, interesting enough, thanks for putting a very complicated question, Poonam. In this instance, you probably would have to apply GDPR because are you located outside of South Africa, right? but you're outsourcing the work to Africa. So someone in South Africa is actually having a premises, having a domicile, processing the information, Pranam. Then both, 100%. Thanks for a very tricky question, Pranam, especially on a Tuesday afternoon. Well done. So
Grant, just on that, what's quite interesting is that South Africa actually is the convener of the creation of the ISO contact center standards, 18295 parts 1 and 2. And one of the parts that we did have in that while we were creating this with obviously a global team, because they're ISO standards, was exactly that point, was looking at data privacy and protection. And it did specify, especially in case where, like South Africa, where we're a big offshore destination, servicing a lot of other geographies, is that whatever the geography being serviced or where the customer sits, that needs to be complied to as well. So that reinforces what you've just said.
100%. Excellent. Good. Let me take this block away because it's just a black screen you're seeing there. But thanks a lot, guys. I think a lot of you guys would be compliant with that. Tracy, do I have any levity to take a few extra minutes?
No, so from our side, from BPESA side, we're fine. I think if anybody needs to dive off, just to let everybody know, we will be sharing the recording, but we definitely seem to have a lot of participation at the moment. So I would appreciate if you gave us a few more minutes. Thanks.
No problem. Excellent. So look, I wasn't sure if we could dive into GDPR. I've left it in there in case we can, and we'll touch on the fines at the end with Poppy. But this is just, I found this great video dealing with GDPR just briefly, and then we can sort of just scan the rest of it for us. So you have an idea, look, I mean, of GDPR and when it comes in, and again, for us, it's important, even if you weren't having to apply GDPR, to understand the basics around that, because if you understand and can apply the big brother, Poppy will walk in the park. This GDPR is a Poppy on steroids, right? So General Data Protection Regulation, right? As I indicated earlier, there was a 2-year grace period, similar to where we find ourselves now, where it was just sort of ease your way into it, get your systems in place, because it seems simple. It seems like, gosh, a year, it's fine. We're 1 year to sort this out. Don't stress, Grant. Why is everyone concerned? And I agree with you. It's not the end of the world necessarily, but the systems you'd have to put in place if you haven't already started complying with organizations like, with GDPR, etc., are quite significant once you really unpack that little checklist that I've given you, a little dipstick I've given you, right? The territorial scope of GDPR applies only to non-EU establishment where data about EU subjects in the European Union is processed with, offerings of goods and services, etc. And obviously, often it is services in your space. Obviously, if you're non-EU residents, you will be required to designate a representative in the EU member state, unless there's some exceptions, right? Fines, interesting enough, whereas our fines are a wee bit less than this, look at the non-compliance GDPR and why it's important that you have your house in order with that, right? They can amount to 20 million euro or 4% of your global annual turnover. We complain about 2% of our annual turnover in South Africa for certain acts and the punishment thereof, up to 10%. 4% of global annual turnover, ladies and gentlemen. That is enormous, right? And again, similar to South Africa, whichever is the greater. Again, for certain other provisions, they can go for minor breaches, 10 million euro or 2% of your annual global turnover, whichever is the greater. So it's imperative that your processes around information and the processing them are jacked up 100%. Okay. Obviously, the data protection provided by GDPR is quite onerous, as you see in that video. And again, I'm not going to go through this one in detail. It was about POPIA. I just gave this in a little extra. You need to appoint, similar to South Africa, we refer to it as an information officer. You look at that third paragraph, a data protection officer will need to be appointed in certain circumstances. And again, same type of responsibilities. So when you look at GDPR, you often look at POPI. Now, if you're starting to look more at POPI and you're going, well, it's almost the same thing. Sure. Don't get caught and think it's exactly the same. There are minor adaptations for the South African context. So please just get jacked up in terms of the text of South Africa. Okay, they give you obligations in terms of implementing technical and organizational security measures. And again, similar to South Africa, security is a big thing, right? And if you're non-compliant, you are going to have claims both from or penalties from the regulator, but also similar to South Africa, potentially civil claims for individuals whose rights have been breached in terms of the GDPR. Okay. And please don't forget that similar in South Africa, you might have a situation where you get punished through the regulator by the couple of million rand fine. However, not only that, as the data subject whose information has been breached, I can potentially sue you civilly as well. Please bear that in mind. Okay. So they talk about consent, and again, I'm not going to go through this that much unnecessarily, but you can work through this, the data subject's right, obviously, to control the information, to store the information, to erase the information, etc. And obviously, certain requests that can be made in respect thereof, similar to what we've learned before. I'll only highlight those then for our time purposes that are different, if anything, from that. Okay. When it comes to EU, the personal data breach, which is different to ours, you need to notify the data protection regulator within 72 hours of your breach, whereas ours just says within a reasonable time frame or reasonable time period. They actually give a time frame within which you must report this, right? And that goes through to the regulator, and in certain high-risk situations only, the data subject. Ours is different there. Obviously, ours is subject and regulator. Okay. Again, with this, whilst POPI hasn't been quite as explicit, GDPR says you must contain a personal data breach register. So when a breach occurs, you must keep a register of those breaches. Okay. Export of data, obviously, it's similar under the previous legislation in terms of personal data can't be exported outside of the European Economic Area unless the recipient has, in the non-EU country, has their own good process in place, right? The fine for not having this in place is 4%. What's nice is because we have strict measures in play and more enforceable even now, more data can go out, which means chances of us having more work in your industry perspective is significantly higher as well. So this is a list of the duties of the regulator in South Africa, right? It's educating parties, and I think this is something that will need to be worked on quite significantly. I think it's been left up, my personal view, it's been left up to the private sector in dealing with this. Monitoring and enforcing compliance, I think she's been phenomenal with that. Not waiting for the act coming into play before already monitoring, giving tips, etc. Consulting with interested parties, there was a significant consultation process in the lead up to the bills, etc. Handling of complaints, I think that's already been dealt with quite well. Research and reporting to Parliament, sure, that will progress as the act comes to play. Code of conduct, we'll get there. And then cross-border cooperation, there's no doubt that as the big brother in Europe has already put good measures in play, there will be cross-border cooperation in respect of this, the more we have multinationals in South Africa. And then you're dealing with Advocate Pansi Katua. She is the information regulator in South Africa, still is. She's held the office for almost 4 years already as the regulator. Some interesting takeaways. I thought I would leave in. Please bear in mind, photocopiers are, sorry, I don't have a watch, as you can see, so I'm checking the time on the cell phone. I'm waiting. I'm patient. I've got the patience of job, and my watch broke, and I hadn't found one that I like. And thank heavens, a nice deal popped up, and I was able to place my order, strange enough, last night. And my watch hopefully will be on its way in sometime soon. All right. Please make certain with photocopiers, particularly in your spaces where there's financial information being copied, there's a hard drive in your, and I never knew this until the research popped up a few years ago, that photocopiers actually have a hard drive that stores the images you put in, right? So whatever you copy, that's just going into the hard drive of that photocopier. So what you need to do is, how do you erase the onboard memory before you get rid of the machine? Erase that onboard memory, right? Make certain that it's wiped. Get a letter from your supplier that's wiping this thing to make certain that they're compliant with POPI, and they're going to indemnify you should any information leak, and they'll bear the brunt of any fine that's placed your way, or alternatively civil remedy. Make certain also your supplier signs a confidentiality with you, particularly with the chaps who are working on the machine, who probably do know that there's an onboard memory on the machine. Interesting enough. Sorry, I thought I'd just share that with you. What I've shared here as well, which we won't read through, reading is always irritating, but develop an IT asset disposal system, right? Establish your call center for hardware collection, get secure transportation, and this is from your office manager, Dr. Peter Tobin. He's made some suggestions. E-waste disposal compliance certificates, data destruction, as he's spoken about earlier, compliance certificates. Remember I told you there's one company with the third last bullet point that has that in South Africa already, probably more coming as well. Minimize your storage, prevent shortages, right? Establish a secure chain of custody of your assets. Make certain that assets, particularly in the IT space, that people know where laptops are, etc. And laptops aren't just lying around randomly, okay? So what I've done is I've included some clauses which you can work through in your own time. You keep it, use it, please check your contracts, make certain they have these in there, where POPIA compliant employee agreements and POPIA compliant third-party agreements. Now, this is not the whole agreement itself, it's clauses to be inserted into that, right? So please look at those, work it in if you haven't done so already. Make certain you have these type of clauses in dealing with information and protection of information. We're almost finished, and I actually might not need those extra minutes, Tracy. I'm quite happy. Maybe we can deal with a few questions, have an extra few minutes for questions. Confidentiality clauses, please, 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 if you haven't had confidentiality clauses in your contract, make certain your employees, particularly those dealing with confidential information in your space, more so potentially, people have names, numbers, all sorts, contract details, etc. Please make certain that confidentiality agreements are signed. Again, sign a confidentiality clause with your third-party service provider so that your third-party service provider also doesn't botch around and you carry liability for their mess-ups. Okay, get indemnities, guys, from the guys. Penalties, so what can go wrong? I always finish off with this. So Tracy, I wasn't trying to scare them earlier, maybe this will scare the guys now, is you can go to jail, right? And your fines are up to only 10 million Rand. I think the fines are minimal. Compare that to your 4% of global annual turnover that we have in Europe. And I wonder why they haven't gone so hard. The standard practice in South Africa when it comes to Competition Act, when it comes to employment equity, etc., and various others has been a percentage of annual turnover. It surprises me, and I'm not certain why. I'm not going to, there is some theory around this, but I'm not going to be putting conspiracy theories out there. but why would it be so small? But still, 10 million rands, 10 million. I think under current circumstances with the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm not certain that people will be sort of sniffing at 10 million. It's not to be sniffed at, right? Again, please don't forget, besides that, if my data is breached, I can sue you for any civil remedies, which includes pain and suffering and stuff like that, I may suffer as a result of that breach. Okay, so I was going to do a little bit of poll and open up for questions and stuff, but briefly, just if you can, you know, think about how you'd rate your compliance with the Act. You don't have to answer this one. I realize now that, you know, you don't want to put it out there and your colleagues go, yeah, you see that company there is non-compliant. So don't stress, you don't have to post that answer there. But it's a little self-assessment in your mind then, in case your competition's online. Ask yourself, how ready are you to comply with the Act now that we've gone through it briefly? But again, you're only going to know probably even more once you go into those forms, right? In conclusion though, before we take questions, if there are any, is please make certain we comply through POPIA awareness sessions. I think it's critical. Your problem's not going to sit with you as a manager, if you're a manager or the same. It's going to sit right on the front line, whichever type of organization you do have. Your challenges on the front line, how people are dealing with information. Remember, your contact center agents are really dealing with at the forefront of clients. Your reputation is absolutely at stake. You know the 8 principles that apply to this, right? And again, use those 8 principles as a guideline to give you an assessment. I've given you as well a short little questions you can ask yourself. Please remember, that's not the full assessment, because we do our assessments as well. So I'm not going to give you our assessment tool, but we do assessments to ensure POPIA has global business solutions. We go out and we'll assess you and give some advice in terms of where you're at and what you could do to try and sort of amend things, change things, fix things, etc. Right? But please do use that guideline, sort of give a dipstick, a feel of how compliant you are or not. Be calm. It's not the end of the world. You've got 1 year to comply and get your house in order. But as I said earlier, don't drag your feet. There's a number of protocols that you need to put in place if you're not already compliant with GDPR. If you are compliant with GDPR, please understand that you're on the fast track. You have an advantage to your colleagues, but please bear in mind, don't get sloppy. Just double check the certain adaptations into POPI. But other than that, from my side, a big thank you, and I'm open to any questions there might be.
Fantastic, Grant. Yeah, thanks so much. Now, I mean, you've given us such a brilliant overview, and there is a lot of detail. And exactly to your point, we can't snooze on this. We need to get active. Couple of questions. Debt collection. What happens in the case of debt collection? My understanding, and please correct me, is that the depth and detail of POPI doesn't apply from a debt collection perspective.
Yeah.
Would that be right?
Yeah. But I would get information, particularly debt collection. Remember, I wouldn't in the contract sort of already, when you sign the commercial contract, have a portion dealing with dispute resolution, etc. So that would cover issues around the processing of information. But the depth of it, you're quite right, wouldn't necessarily apply. Yep. Okay.
So debt collectors are still able to contact the debtor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. You may
you're further processing in terms of the legitimate interests of a party. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Brilliant. You made mention of legal guardianship with regards to an adult signing off on behalf of a child's data, etc. What is that age that I'm going to say a child, or probably a teen, is allowed to sign on their own behalf? Is that 16 or is it 18?
That's an easy question, and it's amazing. All the other tricky questions I got. Sure. 18 for certain types of contracts, 16 for others.
Okay.
But usually it's about 18 for more certain types of contracts for property, etc. as well. Your number's 18, 100%.
Okay, yeah, which makes sense. You partially mentioned this on one of your last slides now with regards to cross-border cooperation. I'm making an assumption that from a GDPR perspective, that cross-border collaboration hasn't been signed off yet. So from a GDPR perspective, no. So, no. Okay, so it's all right. So
it's in the process. Yeah, and that will follow quite short and sharply, I reckon, because our Act only come into effect now. So there's no doubt that would be on the forefront. But reality is that that informal cross-border cooperation would happen. But in terms of formal agreement, not quite yet, no.
Okay, fantastic, excellent. Last question from my side with regards to organizations that do sell databases. There are those that are compliant. What would make them compliant? Because a lot of organizations say we are GDPR or POPIA compliant, we've done X, Y, Z, but are they actually? So us as third parties purchasing that database, what would make that database compliant?
Yeah. If the person, when they disclose the information to that particular party, said that the information could be passed on to third parties for purposes of contact, and it was said basically, we know we're going to sell the database through to you, I'd suggest that's possible. But other than that, I can't think of many real good reasons. That's why when people try and sell databases to me, I must be honest with you, I always tell people not to keen. I must be honest.
Yeah, because at the moment, the only thing that we have been checking as an industry, or I say this very loosely, I'm not making an assumption, is that it's been checked against the do not contact list. But that's the
100%.
only piece of compliance that existed. As for the rest, I'm not actually sure, which is a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
excellent.
there's not much you can do, and that's why I steer clear of actually buying databases personally.
Would be the smart thing to do, absolutely. I see that there was a comment from Abu. Abu, you've asked about POPIA and GDPR, just suggesting that there's a lot of similarities across the two and that you're doing induction training, etc., for your employees. Your question is around compliant methods to try and minimize the training time across the two and the delivery methods. I would suggest that you actually reach out to Grant directly because they do offer this as one of their solutions. So they have a bunch of solutions that they could actually support and assist you with there and really sort of fast track their training. So that's what I would suggest would be the way to go there. So excellent. Grant, we don't seem to have any other questions that have come through. This has been phenomenal. Thank you so very, very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
No worries at all. Best of luck with the rest of your day at your client. Thank you for sharing your time. And yeah, we definitely will be sharing the recording with all of our participants.
Perfect. Thanks very much, guys.
Fantastic. No worries. Thank you, Grant. Cheers.
Bye.